to welcome you all to this very special evening, a very proud day for the Center for Contemporary Studies. I would also like to say special words of welcome to Amrita, to Ashish Nandi, to Ramguha, and to people from the publisher from the review of my PDF. As I said, this is a very special and proud day for us. There are two stars this evening, Amrita, Shah and Ashish Nandi. Amrita Shah needs no introduction to this audience. Ashish Nandi needs no introduction to any audience. Nevertheless, the Center for Contemporary Studies is very proud to place on record that both of them are here this evening for this very pleasant function of releasing this book on Ahmedabad, the city in the world, authored by Amrita Shah, who for some years now has been a visiting faculty at the Center for Contemporary Studies. And I said, she needs no introduction. She is a journalist, she has written other books before, and I'm proud to say that we also released her previous book on the right at the Center for Contemporary Studies some years ago. The next book, and what we will do today is we will have the book released formally by Professor Ashish Nandi, and then we will request Professor Ashish Nandi to speak. Often people tell me that when we get important people to speak, we tell them, please be brief. And I want to tell Professor Ashish Nandi, please speak as long as you want, because we will be delighted to listen to you. But don't be brief, please speak as long as you want to speak, we will be happy to listen to you. And then we will request Amrita Shah to come up and do two things. One is we will ask her to tell her how and why she came to write this book, and also to read some excerpts from this book. So I said Amrita needs no introduction, but I do want to say a little bit about Professor Ashish Nandi. Professor Ashish Nandi is a sociologist and clinical psychologist, and he works on many different areas. His current fascination is in fact genocide. The running themes of his work have been the concern and respect for marginalized categories and systems of knowledge, and a robust skepticism towards expert-driven, packaged professional solutions to human problems. I think these words need to be underlined again and again. He's written very widely, he's extremely prolific, he's written books with titles like Alternative Sciences, At the Edge of Psychology, The Intimate Enemy, The Power of Cricket, The Illegitimacy of Nationalism. You can see the echo of these marginalized categories and systems of knowledge and robust skepticism towards expert-driven packaged professional solutions in the titles of his book. He was a senior fellow and former director of the Center for the Study of Developing Societies for several years. He is an honorary fellow at the same institute now, apart from being the chairperson of the Committee for Cultural Choices and Global Futures, also in New Delhi. Professor Nandi is a distinguished fellow of the Institute of Post-Colonial Studies, Melbourne, and a member of the Global Scientific Committee for Higher Education of UNESCO. Over the years, he is also associated with initiatives such as the Center for Ecology and Food Security in New Delhi, People's Union of Civil Liberties, the Committee for Cultural Choice and Global Futures Delhi, Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, and the Intercultural Institute of Montreal. Professor Nandi has received the Fukuoka Asian Culture Prize in 2007. In 2008, he appeared on the list of the top 100 public intellectuals of the Foreign Policy magazine published by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Many people I know describe him as one of the most important intellectuals of 20th century India. You have to experience this by talking to him, preferably over some whiskey, and you will really understand what a pleasure it is to speak to him. Professor Nandi is fortunately spending some time at the center. He will be here tomorrow also, all of tomorrow. Tomorrow here, and then after that he is spending some time at the National Institute of Advanced Studies in Bangalore. It's a great pleasure to welcome you. This is not your first visit, but we're always happy to have you come again and again. Please come again. We're very pleased to have you here. I would now like to request Amrita Shah to come over here, and Professor Nandi.
I must congratulate the organizers. This is the first time while releasing a book I have been able to open it without I did receive a copy of this book when I arrived there, and I hoped to finish it. But unfortunately I couldn't. So what I will do is I read some parts of it. I will try to locate this study in the context of India's encounters with cities over the last 200 years, where in the hope that the Ahmedabad experiment or Ahmedabad experience will make a different kind of sense to some of you. The first thing I want to point out is this, that one of the myths we have been brought up upon, but which I think all available studies dispute, is this, that the cities came after the villages. Cities are an improved version of villages, and it is normal and natural that villages gradually turn into cities. This is what our elders and our betters taught us in our schools and colleges too. It took me many years to find out that almost no urbanologist now believes that. And the evidence is strewn all around us. There are many reasons why the ruins of villages do not last as long as the ruins of cities. But it remains a fact nonetheless that we have not been able to trace the origins of rural civilization beyond the history of the cities. Cities and villages have coexisted for centuries, in fact millennia. Benares is said to be 4,000 years old, so Damascus is 4,000 years old, and so on and so forth. Everybody knows these things. In this part of the world, I don't have to point that out or emphasize that. How is it that the situation began to change in the 18th century? And in India, in early part of the 19th century. The baseline can be drawn if you have happened to have read or seen Shudrak's play Mrichakotika. It's a Sanskrit play but has been performed in virtually all languages of India at different times, all the major languages. In Shudrak's Mrichakotika, there is an interplay of village and the city in the form of dialogues of the characters. And there is a constant criticism by the Nagariks, the city dwellers of the village, and their stereotypes or prejudices or imageries of the village are very similar to that of ours. But in the same play, there is also the play of the villagers' perceptions, prejudices and stereotypes about the city. Indeed, one gets the impression that it is the interplay between these two sets of prejudices, negative imageries, stereotypes that give a certain liveliness to the kinds of criticism that they are venturing. Indeed, you can say that it is a mutually potentiating an enhancement of the experience of civic and rural life as they interact in a, I won't call it dialectic way, but as an almost kind of antagonist. I put it this way because I would like to believe that these two potentialities, or those two ways of living, let me put it this way, survive in human beings as two sets of potentialities. So that whenever we begin to confront the limitations and the problems of city life, the decadence and the decline of cities, we turn to the criticisms that the villagers offer. And whenever we are sick and tired of the villagers and their nastiness, we turn to the criticisms of the villages that the city offers. Indeed, I will go so far as to say that if you read some of our great writers, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay will be a very good example because he wrote a stringent criticism of the Babus, Bengali Babus of urban Bengal. Savage criticism. Nobody objected to it. My criticism of Ahmedabad, or at least Gujarat, urban Gujaratis, was much milder, though I am facing a suit at the Supreme Court, filed by our present Prime Minister and Zuzumpal, Amit Shah, for that reason. But nonetheless, I do believe that this criticism and counter-criticism allow you to live an urban life where the village is an internal critic within you too of city. And it allows rural India to live with a self-definition where the city is a living criticism of the village too within itself. And this was the case always, for a long time. And I would presume that this was the case in many other civilizations. Certainly in the West Asian or West Asia, some of this dynamics is rather visible in whatever little work we know. Things began to change in the early part of 19th century, the early decades of 19th century in India. There were traditional cities in India. Varanasi was there for 4,000 years. I might add, I will say Kashi was there also for 4,000 years. And Banaras for 4,000 years. I like to believe that because they are not the same. All great cities have more than one name and they have different meanings. When you are about to get married, you go to Banaras to buy Banarasi sari. Okay, or when you go to Varanasi, you are usually go for certain kind of knowledge, classical knowledge. And when you are about to die, you go to Kashi. Nobody goes to Banaras to die. And nobody goes to Kashi to have a Banarasi parliament, though it is available there. But these are different things. No, the contrast between Mumbai and Bombay was always there. I mean, it is now our passion for one city, one name that has allowed us to do this silly thing where you demolish all names except one difference of region. Calcutta has become Kolkata. It is no longer Calcutta, and it is no longer Calcutta. and that has diminished Calcutta. But doesn't matter. That's another story. I don't want to go into that. I want to say that this kind of relationship which existed with the traditional cities, whether it's Varanasi or Ujjain or any other older cities, some of them quite small, this worked in the whether the city was a pilgrimage center or a market center or a political capital. This relationship held. It changed in first decades of the 19th century began to change because in the game entered a new kind of city which, for the absence of a better term, I will call a colonial city. Now, Calcutta is 300 years old, but I am counting it from early 19th century because of a reason. It will become obvious once I have spelled out. Similarly, Bombay is an older city. It is certainly more than 200 years old. That I am confining it to this 200 years because by that time the city has become more consolidated as a city. The newfound cities were a mix of everything, but then they acquired their own characteristics. These colonial cities for the first time became a negation of the village. The village and city, which were seen as two parallel entities, becomes for the first time an evolutionary, have an evolutionary relationship. The villages became the past of the city, and I have been talking with Kanti about this kind of treatment in another context because this evolutionary imagery enters Indian society on various fronts. The villages for the first time became a total negation of the city, and the colonial city became the total negation of the village. So, for the first time, you felt that you can do without the other. But it also meant that the other may feel that they can do without you also. Because they in the action also had, but that confidence wasn't as strong as the confidence of the newfound cities, newly founded cities, that they had the clue, the magical clue to a new kind of civic life. And this negation is a crucial fact and dynamic factor in every city even today. So, how does the village survive where majority of Indians live in the cities? The older relationship is gone. They survive usually in two forms, and which in Indian cities usually tend to coalesce. One, they take the form of slums, and two, they take the form of ghettos. And in Indian cities, usually the slums also are a collection of ghettos. Slums also are a collection of ghettos. And the slums and ghettos together give an altogether different image of the village to the civic person, because they know the slum represents something of the Indian village, because the first entrance to the city often is into slums by migrating workers, migrating jobless individuals seeking new kind of occupations, or sometimes those who have faced oppression and violence in the village trying to escape that. Now, in this kind of situation, the slums become the deciding factor whether the city is really interesting or not, really creative or not. Because the slums only and the ghettos only bring in a large part of the country, in fact the larger part of the country, which would otherwise be totally inaccessible to urban India, to live as if the villages did not exist. And that is why you find in large democracies particularly, the cities which have slums and ghettos are often the ones preferred by artists, painters, creative writers like Amrita, because they bring in sensitivities otherwise which will remain hidden. Because if you cross your street, you can enter a slum in India. India doesn't have large slum areas where you don't dare to enter. There are slums like that. In Chicago, for instance, I have seen such slums. In New York, there are this kind of slums also in many other parts of the world. But there are also slums which are living, vivacious, and which are difficult to negotiate, but nonetheless, which gives you a touch of something other than the city, which lays bare to you what are the problems with which your country is living, which otherwise you will not know. Otherwise you won't know. I propose to you that it is in this context that you will have to see Ahmedabad, a charming medieval city which entered modernity with a clear-cut division between what is rural and what is urban, because right there, serving 110 textile mills one by one which came up in Ahmedabad from laborers from UP and Bihar, we have brought in another concept of the village, another concept of rural living to Gujarat, a different kind of meeting place for confrontation between what is urban and what is rural. And when that city entered the 20th century, let's put it that 20th century is the post-World War II world. India became independent and new kind of situation was created. In that city, I believe democratic mobilization began to look very different. Because Ahmedabad was extremely diverse, Gujarat was even more diverse. Gujarat always was an extremely diverse society. People were accustomed to diversity. When I first we went to Ahmedabad in 1961, I remember if I would refer to one of the Gujarati Muslims as he is a Muslim, isn't he? People would say, no, he's not a Muslim, he's a Memon. No, he's not a Muslim, he's a worker. Because Gujarati Muslims were known by their castes. They call them castes. It was not a caste, a sect, but they were called by their caste. Only the non-Gujarati Muslims had a common name, Muslim. And today, I see in Gujarat, all Muslims are one. And one of the middle-class Gujarati families whom I accidentally met in a dinner in the place of another Gujarati friend, she had the courage to say that not only in India, Muslims are sent all over the world. That also happens. But I am trying to say that diversity of Gujarat, where even some of the Muslims were seen as part of the caste system, where often even Hindus have castes like Hussaini Brahmins. Where else in India you will get Hussaini Brahmins? Punjab there are two families. Hussaini Brahmins. their caste-like pronouns, which one French anthropologist, Dominique Khan, has classified under a Shia sect, one of the Shia sects. Gandhi's mother was a pronoun. Anyway, so there was that much of diversity. So in Gujarat, this diversity for those looking for a mobilizable majority in a democratic elections was extremely difficult. And gradually there emerged not only the movements to unify Hindus, but also classify others as larger aggregates of others. So not as Brahmins, Boras, Aga Khanis and so on and so forth, but as Muslims. So that you can mobilize some against some. Ahmedabad gradually took, my feeling is that it took roughly 35 years to attain this aggregation, so that they could become mobilizable entities. It not only took place in the context of religious groupings, it took place in caste groupings also. I mean, this also I was talking to Kanti that in Gujarat, the Kshatriyas were very influential. There were nearly 250 small states in Kathiawar region, princely states. But aristocracy is always small. And first few elections, they won the elections because people had traditional allegiance to the royal families. But then they began to lose because aristocracy is always small in number. But in Gujarat, fortunately, there was a lot of communities, Shudras and Ati-Shudras, who were aspiring for higher status and claiming that they were fallen Kshatriyas. They deserved Kshatriya status. The Kshatriyas of Gujarat dismissed those claims as absolutely bogus and false. No second, unacceptable. Bogus and unacceptable. But after 2 or 3 elections, once they began to lose in elections, they thought that more important was to increase their numbers. They accepted them all as Kshatriyas. But as a result, in Gujarat today, probably close to 90% of Kshatriyas are non-Kshatriyas. But they vote for Kshatriya candidates. So this consolidation was taking place. In the sections I read of Amrita's book, I find some of the more hilarious descriptions. She doesn't pass a judgment. I'm much more judgmental than she is, but she doesn't pass a judgment. She describes. And the description beautifully brings out some of the inner contradictions of this culture, where you are using religious sects to cross caste boundaries, where you are using a rhetoric which will give you a sense of oneness on a new plane. Traditional theories will not work. Where you cannot call a Muslim a Bhania, though they are Bhania Muslims. Where you cannot call even Sikh-Puri Muslims who wear sacred threads, because they were Brahmins at one time, as Boras or anything, but you have to call them Muslims. This gradually produce a rhetoric where this natural dialogue between communities and geographical locations break down. There's no such dialogue. No such dialogue. You are faced with a situation where only the distribution power matters. I have not read a concluding section. I don't know what is Shashi concluding about it. But I think I can safely invite all of you to believe him to take your, how should I put it, make your own guess about which way the division of society will go in Gujarat over the coming years. My feeling is this, that the Gujarati tradition, as we have known it, is now dead. And the Gujarati middle class culture, which have been going, they had a very old middle class culture. This predated modernity, because it's a trading community. It had to deal with strangers, it had to deal with outsiders. That capacity has been diminishing rapidly. Gujarat has now become extremely chauvinist. And even if you say is something vaguely critical of even Gujarati middle class or Gujarati newspapers, that is immediately used as an insult of Gujarat, all Gujaratis. Immediately. And my prediction is rather, I must say, sad, because I knew that culture well, though I am not a Gujarati. I have a great soft corner for it, because that culture had great dignity and self-confidence. That self-confidence is gone. Self-confidence in business is not the same as self-confidence in culture. All Gujaratis now, good Gujaratis, if they live a virtuous life, virtuous Hindu life, after death, they go not to heaven but to Nirvana. So it is in that context that you have to look at Ahmedabad. It's a mimic city, a cross between Singapore and Shanghai. At least an attempt is that, and perhaps they will succeed in that attempt. It has one of India's highest growth rate, not the highest because they have it claim, one of the highest. And enormous amounts of wealth they have at their disposal. But I am inclined to believe that it will take at least 2 generations for Gujarat to recover its own soul, to recover the confidence in itself as Gujarat. Because the sign of that confidence of a culture, the cultural self-confidence, is this: how much you can host the otherness of others. This is not my slogan, this is Japanese slogan. I borrowed it from them. How much not you can host the sameness of others. Not how much I can call you my brother, you are almost like us, but how much I can celebrate your difference, how much different you are, how much you can celebrate that capacity. Gujarat had that capacity. Some of the finest the creations of Locomoose here, he no longer fashionable, but he was then. But in Gujarat, because Gujaratis didn't interfere. They thought that they will give you a free hand. Now, of course, they will demand that they put a dome of a temple on the top of one of some of these landscapes and throw it. But that's a different story. But I am also confident that Gujarat will recover its soul. And Gujarat will find itself in its diversity, not in its newfound confidence in a national, in a form of ethnicity which they would like to call nationality, or they call aspita, not nationality really, but in the very diversity and dialogue between amongst these different highly radical differences that exist within it. Thank you very much for your attention. Sorry I took so much time.
Thank you, Ashish. Before I call upon Amrita, I'd like to announce that some of you already know this, but those who came late, copies of the book are on sale outside. There are two incentives to buy. There's a 20% discount, and the author will sign free of charge. Now I call upon Amrita, both, as I said, to tell us how and why she came to write this book, and I will also request her to read some excerpts.
Thank you, Rajan, and thank you, Dr. Nandi, for giving such an eloquent exposition of the kind of history of... Yeah. I was thinking while Dr. Nandi was speaking, and he was sort of talking about the history of Gujarat, the history of Ahmedabad, the history of the village and the city, and I know you've written a very fine book, The City and the Village.
The Ambiguous Journey.
Journey to the, yes, it was such a beautiful book that talked about this sort of inhabiting of, the village and the city in kind of one place. My project came out of a different impulse. So I'm going to worry you all because my project came out of thinking that Ahmedabad was a kind of model for the rest of the country. The new Ahmedabad seemed to me to be setting the tone for what might follow outside. So instead of sort of worrying about Gujarat, I'm going to kind of say that I think that this is something that I worry about is going to take a kind of national sort of role. I first went to Ahmedabad in 1985 as a journalist to cover an outbreak of caste-communal violence. It was a very protracted episode of violence, very brutal and very baffling for people outside. They couldn't understand. And this question I've seen asked all the time whenever violence breaks out in Gujarat, that in the land of Gandhi, why so much violence? And I found every time I cover a riot, I've seen that the same question is asked. So clearly there's something sort of, we're missing the perspective on this. But when I went in 85, first of all, what I was struck by was the architecture of the city. It's an old city, it's a pre-colonial city, and you have all kinds of architecture. You have Sultanate, you have vernacular, you have colonial, you have Mughal, you have Le Corbusier and Louis Vuitton's buildings, you have Charles Correa's work in the Sabarmati Ashram complex, Balkrishna Doshi, Palwindi and Rai. So it's visually a very striking city. And then there are all these institutions, the Center for Environmental Planning Technology, National Institute of Design, IIM. And then there were the people. I met the Chief Minister who had actually sparked up this big ruckus, this particular agitation, by expanding the caste reservation quotas. But he was the state's first backward caste Chief Minister. And I also met a successor who would be the first tribal Chief Minister. I met these very dignified men in Khadi who ran the Gandhian trade union. I met these very tough middle-class, middle-aged women, Hindu women in the old city who boasted about how they'd thrown stones at the paramilitary forces and sent them packing. I heard stories about Muslim bootleggers who are stabbing people with sort of specially hooked knives with poison tips. I met this mill owner who lived in this palatial house with peacocks around his lawn and his very elegant wife who designed clothes for Issei Miyake. So I went there expecting this sort of provincial town, and I found this extremely complex and multi-layered and sophisticated city. And it was sort of many paradoxes, and yet, for instance, it was so violent and yet so dynamic. There's sort of so much mobility, political mobility, social mobility, and yet there was a sort of background of violence continuing. There were sort of these diverse people, and yet there was a certain cohesiveness. And I think Dr. Nandi mentioned this middle-class city, and I think one of the sort of reasons why I thought this community is so self-assertive is probably because it was such a bourgeois city, in the sense that the middle class didn't shrink and hide behind closed doors in Ahmedabad. They came out, they threw stones, they pulled their kids out of school when they wanted to protest about a government policy. They were active and they were militant, and I thought that was quite unusual. Over the years, I went back a couple of times to Ahmedabad to do stories. One story was on the self-employed Women's Association, which was started by the visionary Ela Bhatt. She wanted to organize women who were outside the trade union ambit, so women, vegetable vendors, hawkers, people like that. And she helped them in many ways, but also with small loans and banking services. The other story I went to do was an interview with Karsan Patel, the head of Nirma. His story is quite well known. He was a chemist who decided to do something, make a cheap detergent powder at a time when detergent powder was considered an upmarket product and only multinationals like Hindustan Lever made it. But he made this powder in his backyard and peddled it on a cycle door to door, and started a multi-billion rupee business. So I thought these are kind of really interesting stories of enterprise. But also they made viable businesses that looked at the small man's need, the poor man's need. Ahmedabad made a great impression on me, and I kind of carried it through. Till the early 2000s, I was in the city quite frequently to research a biography of Vikram Sarabhai. Vikram Sarabhai, the founder of India's space program, came from a very distinguished Ahmedabadi family, and many of his institutions were there. So I went there quite frequently in the early 2000s. And this was a time when Gujarat was very much in the news because of the Godhra and the post-Godhra violence. And I think because I was spending more time there and I wasn't rushing in and out and I wasn't reporting the story, I started looking at what I thought were other dimensions of the story. And I started asking questions that I was not finding the answer to in the media. So the first question that occurred to me was, why is this particular region so hospitable, so prone to communal violence? Gujarat had seen the first post-partition, the major outbreak of violence in 1969. There was violence all through the 90s, and then of course came 2002. There's a list of cities that are prone to violence prepared by Ashutosh Varshney in 2003. And Gujarat has 3 cities in that. And Ahmedabad kind of was second highest, but that was before 2002. And according to another scholar, Christoph Jaffelot, it now is the top. So I found myself wondering why. And I did have some inkling because I had studied some of this phenomenon in 1985 as well. But the mainstream media, the national media, kept talking about Gujarat as a laboratory for Hindutva. And I really was not interested in the machinations of politicians. I was really interested in what was the environment that was receptive to this, if this was indeed an experiment. I was interested in what ordinary people were thinking and how they were acting. And one of the things I found was that there was a kind of consensus amongst the Gujarati Hindus that the violence of 2002, and I'm talking about the mass attacks against Muslims, was justified, or if not justified, they would not talk about it. They would, very often I was told that you national media people have exaggerated everything, nothing much happened, I went to my office every day, things like that. Either they wouldn't look at it, or they justified it and said it was a good thing. And so you found you could not even talk about it. You could not say anything that was seen as being sympathetic to the victims. Another thing I noticed was that the absence of a civil society response. Unlike Delhi in 1984 and in Mumbai in 93, where people came out, whatever their biases or prejudices, they came out, collected clothes, collected money, collected food packets, and they came to the help of the victims. This was completely absent in 2002. And there was fear, there was intimidation, and there was a peace meeting had been broken up in the Sabarmati ashram, and even outside IIM gates, I was told it was a small meeting and it was broken up. But I think it was more than that. As I said, there was a kind of consensus that this was okay. And you found that manifested also in the changing geography of the city. Again, this is not exactly new. Since 1986 or so, the two kind of Louder? Yeah?
A little louder.
Sorry. Hindus had been eased out of Muslim-dominated localities, and Muslims were being eased out of Hindu-dominated localities. And this process started in the mid-80s, sharpened in the 90s, but by 2002, I mean a little later, let's say, it was kind of complete. Muslims were ousted from the core. I mean, the core city was occupied by Hindus, and Muslims occupied the kind of. They were pushed to ghettos on the periphery, which kind of grew, expanded in size. So again, and then on the sidelines, I mean, one noticed that Ahmedabad was transforming. Malls, multiplexes were coming up, highways, flyovers, all this, even before actually many other parts of the country. And this kind of modernization was happening at a really rapid pace. Luxury hotels, urban beautification projects. And in 2005, Ahmedabad doubled in size. They took over the villages around it and doubled in size, so it became eligible for being called a mega city, which entitled it to funds from the central government to develop its infrastructure. And this particular announcement was treated with great jubilation, celebratory hoardings, and Narendra Modi was then chief minister, promised to turn Ahmedabad into a new Singapore. And this was very common because Singapore and Shanghai were the kind of ideals for chief ministers across the country. So there's nothing new about that. In fact, this was happening against a backdrop of urbanization in the rest of the country. Since '91, since the announcement of the new economic policy, it was kind of taken for granted that cities would be the way to grow. That cities would be the engines of growth. That was the kind of catchline. And we had various policies being announced to further that. So 1993, you had a mega cities policy that identified 5 cities to develop. In 2005, you had the very ambitious Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission, which was going to develop 63 cities at a cost of about 100,000 crore, and then take up all the small towns after that. And now we are on the cusp of smart cities, 100 smart cities program, and yet another expanded urban program. But I found that we're talking about doubling our urban population in a few years, and the numbers keep changing, so I'm reluctant to actually say 2030. It was 2030 some years ago, but I think it's now projected to happen even faster. And given the significance of this shift, I saw that all the talk was of infrastructure, it was of economic gains, it was of legislation, resource mobilization, and no one was talking about people. No one is talking about how people would live, how their lives would be affected, relations between communities and classes would be affected. And there is a lot of work that has been done on the social impact of urbanization. It's not that it's not known. I mean, the most obvious sort of direct example that one can think of is communal violence, which, as I just pointed out, Ashutosh Vashni's study points out that it's an urban problem, not a rural problem of rural India. Professor Nandi has done a lot of work on the link between modernization and sectarian conflict. And many Indian-based scholars, have also been saying that there is a kind of link between urbanization and communal violence, though that the link is not very clearly spelled out. But I just pointed out as one area at least of concern. The other area is inequality, which it seems to have been a kind of a worldwide trend in cities across the world right now. With the sort of new liberal economic policies, there is a growth of inequality. And in urban spaces, scholars have observed that what gentrification does is that it raises prices of real estate, and the poor and socially people of a lower social status are moved out to the margins. So what I was interested in thinking about was that what will India be like? When you have this sort of urban skirt, how will our cities look? How will we relate how will we be affected? How will our urban aesthetics be affected? How will our cultural values be affected? What kind of people will we be? And what will be the ethos of the new city? And I think that was what kind of interested me, and I wanted to kind of explore that. And since I was in Ahmedabad and these thoughts were kind of coming to me there, Ahmedabad was clearly what I thought I should write about. But apart from the fact that it was a kind of fascinating city that lent itself to description, I thought there were several reasons why I thought this was a good place to locate my study. First of all, Ahmedabad has always been an urban center since its inception in 1411. And it's also been a city in the kind of modern sense. It had a corporate tradition, it had a hereditary bourgeois elite, it had its own sort of ways of generating resources, and it had industry. It was at one point the second largest producer of textiles after Bombay. So all these sort of factors made it an urban center of some kind of lineage. The other sort of the two features that I noticed were the communal divide and the popularity of a leader who was very strongly wedded to privatization and kind of flamboyant play for global investment. I thought that these were all trends that were national trends, and it was reflective of national trends, though it was so sort of seen so vividly in this place. And I thought that if I looked at this urban center that has a long experience, as I said, corporate tradition and of enterprise, it would kind of allow one to contextualize this sort of moment, both sort of in history, historically, and looking into the future of it. And then the third factor was that I thought 2002, the violence, the mass attacks against Muslims, I thought it was not fully, the significance of it, I felt was not understood. I mean, I thought it had been treated merely kind of as a communal incident, a sort of episode. But I felt that it was setting the stage for a structural shift. And I think that 2014, in a sense, bears out my hypothesis, because I thought it advertised a leader who was strong enough to put down dissent, and then would kind of take that to another place, which is the economic sphere. So that was another kind of motivation. And fourth, because Ahmedabad has a sort of very complex and long history, I thought that it was possible to see other developmental ideas, the ideas of Sardar Patel, for instance, who had a very strong leadership role in the city in the 1930s. You could see sort of the Nehruvian vision play out in many ways. And of course, there's the alternative vision of Gandhi, who actually lived there, who practiced many of his sort of experiments, social experiments over there, language, for instance, education, and so on. So these are all the kind of various ideas that I had, which kind of, in various forms, I don't know if they kind of translate into the book in exactly the same way, but I think that what I was very interested in doing was giving it, also writing in a new form, experimenting a bit with form. So I am a journalist, so that is very useful. My experience is very useful in kind of going around the city, meeting people, ferreting out information. I did a lot of academic reading, so in that sense the book is not impressionistic. There is a kind of structure, and each chapter kind of looks at an aspect of the new city. And then lastly, I mean, there is a sort of wrapping, which is, I attempt to be at least literally, because I wanted to write in a way that appealed both to the sort of senses, to the emotions, and also to the intellect. Now, I don't know whether I succeeded, but that was the attempt. And I'll read a little bit of the book. The book is quite short. It has 7 chapters in the coda. And I'm going to read from chapter 2. Chapter 2 does sort of many things. It introduces the ecology of the city. It introduces the sort of psyche, the mindset of people, and it tells a bit of the history. And I've tried to not tell the whole history. What I've done is selected 4 elements, which is finance, power, religion, and development. And I try to kind of see how these elements play off each other over time. So I'm going to read 2 bits at sort of random and then come to the last bit, which comes to a contemporary time. There was once... Yeah? Can I be heard? Yeah? In the shallows of the Sabarmati, oh yeah, I should start by saying, of course, that Ahmedabad, like many cities, was founded on the banks of a river, in this case the Sabarmati, which rises from the Aravalli and flows out into the Gulf of Cambay to the Arabian Sea. And Ahmedabad was founded on its banks in 1411. In the shallows of the Sabarmati, the Kavlis would stand in pairs, facing each other, between them a bag of macerated pulp made of discarded ropes, fishermen's nets, rags and hemp. Muslims of Arab descent, the Kavlis lived in the village of Kochra. The name possibly a corruption of the phrase Kuchi Arab, habitation of Arabs, by the river. The paper-making skills were probably acquired from the Chinese and travelled down the ages. Paper was used in Cambay in the early 15th century, when much of India was writing on leaves. And travellers from the 17th century record the variety of papers produced in Ahmedabad. From the gold-bordered fashion papers, much in demand in the Muslim countries of the Gulf, and used for issuing invitations by persons of rank and wealth, to the cheap Barigoria, used for accounts and legal purposes. Gujarat's long curved coastline, giving onto the rugged terrain of Central Asia, has made for an itinerancy, a nomadic strain relentless as the ebb and flow of the tide. For centuries, people have watched over the Gujarati peninsula. Pastoralists, shepherds, hardy horsemen, dauntless warriors, invaders, plunderers, travellers and saints trudging in overland, while the tossing sea brought canny traders, sunburned sailors, shipbuilders, scholars and geographers. One can hear the call of the sea in the emptiness of the vast courtyard of the Jami Masjid, in which the faint lines between the stone slabs seem to run into eternity. The burnished horizon, visible from hundreds of kilometers of the sandy coastline, filled the Gujarati with an awareness of immense possibility. Meanwhile, the items of exchange brimming in the marketplace, silk and porcelain from China, Indonesian spices, Arabian horses, European wool, agitated him with screams of profit. A salviferous air affected everyone it touched with the spirit of entrepreneurship and commerce. Brahmins neglected their traditional occupations of priesthood and scholarship and took up trade. Kshatriyas and Rajputs left soldiery. Akbar, native of the mountainous reaches of Central Asia, first came upon the sea when he took over Gujarat in 1573. The Mughals thereafter would rely heavily on oceanic trade. New commercially oriented Islamic sects like the Bohras originated in Gujarat. The Parsis, descendants of Persians who had fled oppression and taken shelter on the Gujarat coast in the 8th century, were consummate entrepreneurs, and even children designed games of commodity speculation. I'm jumping a bit now. There was once, it is said, an Ahmedabadi shade who, because his delicate eyes could not tolerate brightness of any kind, spent his days indoors, seeing by the dull luminescence of jewels embedded in the walls of his house. If history were not about emperors, the vastness of their dominions, and the savage wars they fought to retain them, but were instead about the canny men who encrusted crowns with exotic gems, who maintained the ledgers and who provided money with which the wars could be fought, then the Ahmedabadi shade might have left the dim pearly glow of the back room to emerge into the harsh limelight of account. In Kiran Nagarkar's novel Kapold, we encounter the character of Adinath Mehta, a grand old man and a financier of princes, one who wields his considerable clout with a show of social intimacy, one who had refined the game of protocol, wherein he had the upper hand but placed himself in the position of a supplicant. The inspiration for the shrewd and manipulative Adinath Mehta may well have been the legendary 17th century Ahmedabad merchant Shantidas Zaveri. Shantidas, whose forefathers came from Osia, the ancient Rajasthani desert town, where a Kshatriya prince and his people forestalled war to embrace the pacifist Jain religion, had made his early fortune in the humid port town of Cambay. Moving to Ahmedabad, Shantidas established a widespread banking network, encouraged by the standardization of currency under Akbar. Banking networks such as his assisted in the collection of taxes and, more importantly, provided resources to finance the emperor's military operations and other state requirements. Shantidas, one of the empire's foremost bankers, came to be deeply imbricated with the personal affairs of the royal family. As a jeweler to the Mughals, he had rare access to the perfumed recesses of the Zenana, where he advised queens and princesses, many of whom owned ships and relied on merchants to supervise their commercial transactions. Using his privilege and his financial muscle, Shantidas is conjectured to have maneuvered successions, rebellions, and failed coups from the time of Akbar, who died in 1605, to Aurangzeb, who ascended the Delhi throne in 1658. Civic and community leadership came naturally to merchants of such means and influence. Ahmedabad already had rich urban traditions, including guilds of artisans and merchants called Panch and Mahajan. On Shantidas was conferred the honorific Nagar Sheikh, head of the city. The title, mixing with the fertile influence of religious precepts, established an institutional order of patricians and engendered a concern among the privileged towards urban matters that would make Ahmedabad special among cities. I'm coming now to the kind of last bit of the paragraph of the chapter, which is a more contemporary scenario. The Sabarmati flows by architect Bimal Patel's office in Usmanpura. Through the bevel-edged glass, one can see a patch of lawn with little purple flowers overlooking the thousand pink sands. An exhalation seems to rise from the river, a heady blue airiness, a tantalizing dance of sky and water. It is a view that the occupant of the office would have gazed upon as he sat, conceptualizing, planning, and giving form to the vision that will reimagine the Sabarmati as a version of the Thames or the Seine. An exhibition mounted for the 2007 Vibrant Gujarat Summit, a biennial event organized by the Gujarat government to woo foreign investors, illustrates the key features of Bimal's design for the Sabarmati Riverfront Development Project. In models, wall-to-wall posters, and computer-simulated projections, the river, flat, glazed, runs through banks manipulated to create a uniform breadth. Water channeled through canals from a recently dammed Narmada River 200 kilometers away has turned the Sabarmati's vacillating flow into a perennial fullness. Concrete walkways with steep staircases run along an 11-kilometer stretch on either side of the river. Pin-sized figures with elongated shadows dot the grey-baked ground. On a second level, running alongside the river are manicured lawns and tall buildings. Beyond the buildings are highways of 6 lanes and 4 lanes, known as the East River Drive and West River Drive respectively. Of the variable river and its homely sands, reminder of mountain range and desert, there is no trace. The blazing lights from the buildings, the fluorescent green lawns, the cars racing by, and sailboats on the billowing sea of water suggest an attempt at urban imagineering attuned to the neoliberal project of city marketing. The possibility of developing the riverfront has been discussed since the 1960s, when a French architect and Ahmedabadi resident, Bernard Cohn, evoked visions of a Parisian promenade on 30 hectares of reclaimed space on the riverbank. A group of architects and planners, including Bimal's father Hasmukh Patel, came together in the mid-1980s as the Riverfront Development Group, with a pared-down version of the project, focusing mainly on improving public access to the river. In 1997, the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation, emboldened by the prioritization of urban regeneration projects post-India's liberalization, established a special purpose vehicle, the Sabarmati Riverfront Development Corporation Limited, and appointed the Environmental Planning Collaborative, a not-for-profit firm headed by Bimal Patel, to prepare a comprehensive proposal. The project got underway in 2004. But as its potential ramifications came to light, it provoked not an inconsiderable degree of concern among members of the public. Widespread flooding in the city in 2006, for instance, raised anxious questions about the ecological consequences of casing a river. The announcement that almost 20% of the 200 hectares of reclaimed space would be sold to real estate developers and 28% deployed for roads prompted murmurs that public space was being usurped by the state for the use of the rich. Over 10,000 families living on the riverbank were initially promised resettlement on the reclaimed land but were left out in the new plans, making for the largest potential displacement in the city's history. And there was the matter of the rising costs, from an estimated rupees 361 crore in 1997 to rupees 1,200 crore. Bimal Patel's energetic manner belies his close-cropped grey hair, conferring on him a youthful, almost impish aura. He was born in Ahmedabad and studied at the St. Xavier's High School, Loyola Hall, in Navranpura, where, he says, the charismatic father Erviti opened Patel's middle-class eyes to poverty. Photographs of Jesuit priests are pinned on the wall behind him. A plaque says, "I am a Xavierite, I care indeed." Post-school and a BA in architecture, he went to Berkeley to be taught by David Harvey and Richard Walker, urban geographers whose work engaged with the spatial impact of capital, and Manuel Castells, the eminent sociologist, preoccupied then with the Marxist approach to urbanism. He, that is Bimal, seems to relish the confusion caused by his resume. He suggests that he might have undergone an ideological realignment. In his architectural practice, he says he moved from a search for a vernacular idiom to an embrace of internationalism. Similarly, he has come to feel that India's socialist past served her badly by tying her up in obstructive laws. His own breakthrough moment came in 1994 when he was invited to redesign a city street, an early urban entrepreneurial project with corporate participation. He tends to return to this experience often in conversation, dwelling on it in a way that suggests a level of gratification surpassing that which he may have received from other accomplishments, including perhaps winning the prestigious Aga Khan Award for Architecture early in his career. Again and again, and with an unwavering gusto, he describes the challenges of the project, the procedures and strategies for countering naysayers, skeptics, and bad publicity, the overcoming of obstacles put forward by adamant politicians, the media, and the public. The thrill of the backroom fix is evident too in the way he deals with criticism about the riverfront project. Despite the Chief Minister's ownership of the venture and the involvement of senior officials, Bimal, as the designer and executor, has become its most visible spokesperson. He defends the project at seminars and in interviews. He counters concerns about potential ecological damage, claiming that narrowing the river is as hazardous as pinching a garden hose. He pacifies community representatives by promising to accommodate informal markets threatened by the enterprise. He moves with agility, sometimes arguing, sometimes mollifying, sometimes throwing his hands up and saying he is bound by orders, sometimes shrugging and saying you cannot please everybody. He talks little about design or engineering difficulties, or his motivations as a professional for undertaking this mammoth responsibility. He appears to simultaneously own and disown the project. At times, he conveys the impression that his overriding interest is just that it should get done. At other times, he suggests a deeper impulse, a vision of a public space without walls, a public space where we agree on adjusting with each other. On one occasion, we talk about books. I tell him about Robert A. Caro's monumental biography of Robert Moses, the man lionized for his visionary plans to develop New York, until people counted the costs, the extravagance, the thousands of families, mostly poor and black, he displaced, to build his highways, bridges, tunnels, showpiece buildings, and parks. Projects that prioritize the needs of car owners and of the rich, and would forever limit the city's ability to respond to its growing size in an environmentally sustainable and humane way. Bimal has just finished reading about Hitler's architect, Albert Speer. Speer gave shape to the Führer's monumental fantasies. The Zeppelin-felled, a vast parade ground ringed with searchlights, for instance, was Speer's idea. He was the only senior Nazi to accept responsibility for Hitler's regime, but many saw his expression of remorse as a strategic move to escape the death sentence at Nuremberg. I buy Gita Sareni's fascinating biography of the man, but find that despite the writer's extensive research, Speer and his motivations remain a mystery. The last time I visit Bimal's office, he shows me the new publicity material that is being prepared for the Sabarmati Riverfront Development Project. It is another attempt to diffuse criticism about the project, this time through a change of visuals. The large poster on the table is vastly different from the previous stark images. For one, it is colorful because it foregrounds people rather than cold structures. Ordinary people, men, women, children, are sitting, walking, enjoying the riverfront. Then Vimal takes me to the terrace of his office building to present a bird's eye view of the riverfront. Under the blue winter sky, I see the heavy machinery, the 50-foot deep diaphragm, the retention walls, the dull grey promenade. I remember something Vimal said to me in one of our earlier conversations. People are not used to seeing so much concrete, he said. But to carry 4 million people, a city needs to be hard. The setting sun has disappeared behind the clouds, casting a purplish shadow over the riverbank. The river is murky like the dipping water in an artist's bowl. The lights from the buildings across the river make thin silvery lines in the water, flanking a block of green glimmer from a hoarding. The sky softly explodes with color, soft feathery clouds against a brilliant, luminous orange.
Thank you, Amrita. I would now like to request Dr. Ramchandra to have to say a few words.
Gandhi once famously remarked, India lives in her villages. Well, he was spectacularly wrong. And not only at the time he made this remark, which is the 1930s, but looked at from the longer perspective of history. Professor Ashish Nandi has reminded us about Banaras, also known as Kashi, also known as Varanasi. But cities have not just been places where Indians have lived and argued and loved and quarreled and made paintings and sung songs. They have also been cities of the imagination. Think of Ayodhya, Hastinapur, Indraprastha. So even in our epics, cities are extremely important. Maybe sometimes, as Professor Nandi pointed out, as dens of vice, as places where greed is articulated. But cities are an essential part of the sociology, history, politics and moral imagination of India from well before the British and from well before the Mughals. But of course, again, as Professor Nandi pointed out, there have been some profound transformations in the way cities have organized themselves and reorganized themselves over the last 200 years or so. Now, as it turns out, Gandhi's problematic maxim, India lives in her villages, has been taken all too seriously by sociologists and also by activists. I am by training a sociologist, and to every study of a city, there are 500 studies of a village. And this may be partly because India also does live in her villages, maybe the majority of India has lived in her villages. It's also partly due to the fact that middle-class academics feel guilty about living in cities. Almost all our sociologists, still recently, came from an urban background. So you think the real India is in the villages, because that's the India you don't know. And of course, Gandhi has told you that India lives in the villages. In the 50s and 60s, if you looked at the extraordinary number of studies on caste, every single village in every single state, more or less, had a field study done of it. And it's only recently that the interest of scholars and sociologists have turned to cities. There have, of course, in the past been exceptions, and not always Indian. One of the finest studies by a sociologist I know of India was Owen Lynch's study of Agra and the question of untouchability in Agra. It's a classic study. I mean, anyone interested in Dalit studies should really read Owen Lynch, published in the 1960s, but these were exceptions. So sociologists had an anti-urban bias. And so did activists. I am a sociologist by training, and for the first 20 years of my professional career, I worked closely with the environmental movement. And I once remarked, and I think my statement was largely true then, that the Indian environmental debate is an argument in the cities about what is happening in the countryside. So if you look at the great environmental battles of our time, the Chipko Andolan concerned with forests, the Narmada Andolan concerned with water, the Kerala fisher folk struggle concerned with the marine ecosystems, whether it be activism or research, it's been essentially on forests, water, biodiversity, pasture, and to some limited extent on the way in which industrialization has disrupted the village environment, and also mining, the impact of mining on Adivasi and peasant cultures. But urban environmental activism has been relatively let me say, underpaid. Again, there are honorable exceptions, and I don't want to diminish that. But there's been an anti-urban bias in our thought, our scholarship, and our activism over the last 50, 80, 100 years. So that's, of course, one really crucial reason why Amrita Shah's book is particularly welcome. Now, coming to the city she is studying and she's written about, Ahmedabad. Professor Nandi and I share one thing in common. We both fell in love in Ahmedabad. My wife also, I first met her in Ahmedabad. She was a student of the National Institute of Design. And it took me many years, as long as it took me to do my PhD, and those of you who have done your PhDs know that takes a very long time. So it took me as long as I did my PhD to convince her parents that I could marry her. So I could never meet her in Bangalore, which was her hometown and mine. I had to meet her in Ahmedabad. So I have a long connection with Ahmedabad, that I have deep feelings of love and, also some kind of complication towards the city. And again, Ashish Nandi is absolutely right about one aspect of Ahmedabad. The transformation in the attitude of Gujaratis to the other. And I would like to illustrate it with a story, which involves Ashish Nandi. And he had to dig into the research with me. He'll remember it, but it'll take some time. In the year 1989, Ashish Nandi and I were part of a group of Indians, 6 or 7 of us, who went for an academic conference in Karachi. This was sort of, Zia had died. It was early 1989. Zia had gone to heaven, sent by a box of mangoes, or was it? Or something of the sort. And Benazir Bhutto had come to power. Here we had a young Prime Minister, also elected, Rajiv Gandhi. There was a kind of thaw, and as part of that, there was a conference in Karachi, to which many Indians, 6 or 8 Indians got a visa. Indian scholars got a visa. And it was in a hotel in the evening. One elderly gentleman started up, He must have been in his 70s. And he saw me. And he said, "Are you Indian?" He said, "Yes." He said, "I'm told there's some academic conference here and some Indians have come." And he said, "This is Karachi in 1989, 42 years after partition." He says, "Do any of the Indians there speak Gujarati?" So fortunately, I knew about Ashish and his love interest. And the fact that Ashish had to learn Gujarati while wooing Uma. Uma had to learn better Bengali later, but that's a separate story, which I'll leave for the moment. So I said, yes, I know someone. There is, in that, among the Indians, there was a Tamil, there was a Haryanvi, there was a Malayali, and there was Ashish Nandi, who spoke Gujarati. So I took him to the room where the conference delegates were, and as he entered, the Pakistanis were quite shocked, because they recognized him. He was quite a distinguished Pakistani, elderly Pakistani. They recognized him. And then I said, "What are you doing here?" I took him to Ashish, and they started talking Gujarati. And then a Pakistani friend of mine said, "Do you know who that is?" He said, "That's one of our bravest newspaper columnists." I said, "What's his name?" He said, "Arde Shir Kowasji." So a Pakistani Parsi, desperate to speak Gujarati, found a Bengali Christian to speak it. Now, this is the story of the Ahmedabad that once was. And perhaps, if Ashish Nandi's optimism is not misplaced, the Ahmedabad that may once become. And I think Amrita Shah's book beautifully shows that transition. I didn't want to speak about the book because I've been, in some way associated with it. I'm part of a foundation which funded part of Amrita's research. I've loved the book, so obviously I'm a partisan. But it's a wonderfully nuanced and rich account, mixing field work and analysis. The judgment is understated, but it's there. And I wanted to credit only for one thing about the book, some credit. The book was finished some time ago. I think it was the final draft may have been ready probably 18 months ago.
2013.
Yeah, so about 18 months ago. And there was a debate about when it should be published. Now, the publisher and Amrita and I were involved in this debate. And this was about the time it seemed clear that Narendra Modi would be our next Prime Minister. And, of course, the publisher wanted to cash in on that and publish it soon. And I said, no. I said, it'll get lost as a pro-anti-Narendra Modi book. This book is far too important to be pigeonholed in that, I know Narendra Modi is a man of colossal vanity, but this book is much more than about Narendra Modi. So I said, let it come out at least a year after Mr. Modi has, been elected. And I think in retrospect, that's a good decision. But this is a really deep and insightful work of urban sociology. I think it's a kind of book that will inspire studies of Bangalore, of Hyderabad, of Surat, of Ujjain, or many other of our cities. And I heartily and strongly and unequivocally commend it to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram, Ashish, Amrita, for a very nice evening. As I said, books are still available for those who would like to buy. I'd like to thank you all for this evening.